balancing truth, principles, and perspective. This is the Equalizer Podcast. I'm Evan Queich, Marine veteran, product guy by trade, father, believer, and the guy who keeps asking the questions nobody wants to answer. On this show, you're not going to get any spin. I'm not going to give you the team to root for. I'll give you the mechanism, how things actually work, and why they're actually happening. And I'll talk to you about what the people who built this country actually thought about it and would think about it today. The founders called the American vision, the American experiment, a republic. John Adams had a more detailed expression. He said it was made only for a moral and religious people and wholly inadequate for any other. Today, three things we're going to talk about. Who I am and why that matters, the most ambitious infrastructure project in human history, and a chapter from my book that might explain why you feel like the ground is shifting every single day. This is the Equalizer, truth back on the scales. Let's go. Before anyone trusts your analysis, they really need to understand your foundation. Not just your conclusions, but your foundation. I don't ask you to agree with me. I ask you to understand where I'm standing and why. As a Marine, we have several core values: honor, courage, commitment. These are not credentials. This is a framework of identity that we subscribe to when we become Marines. Honor is uncompromising integrity, acting responsibly to fulfill our obligations and hold ourselves and others accountable for every action. Courage is the mental, moral, and physical strength ingrained in us as Marines and enables us to do what is right, adhere to a higher standard of personal conduct, and to make tough decisions under stress and pressure. Commitment is the spirit of determination and dedication found in Marines that leads to the highest order of discipline for individuals and units, inspiring us to achieve victory in all of our endeavors. These aren't abstract, they are operational. Tell the truth when it costs you. Do the right thing when it's hard, and don't quit. Those don't go away when you take the uniform off. As Marines, we live by four pillars as well: unit, core, God, country. For me, those became faith, family, freedom, and first principles, not because the military values were wrong, but because civilian life requires a different application. One of the things that I adhere to quite strictly is questioning many things, almost everything. Thomas Jefferson gave us the permission structure for honest inquiry. He said, question with boldness even the existence of God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. It wasn't that he was skeptical towards God. It's intellectual honesty as an act of faith. See, God isn't threatened by your questions. He made the mind that asks them. He wants you to seek the answers, and that's how I view it. Now, there are two country songs that really break down sort of my worldview and how I look at things. A couple of lines from those country songs that you might know. God is great, beer is good, people are crazy. And the second one, I'm a little crazy, but the world's insane. This show isn't a lecture, it's a conversation. It's a conversation between people who are all trying to figure it out. We understand that there's going to be differences between us, disagreements. Not everybody's going to be on the same page on everything. My goal here isn't to tell you what to think, it's to show you how I think, and maybe that encourages you to think in a similar way. I want to start with first principles here. When I think about government, and I think about its role in our lives and how I approach it, there's really 7 layers. Let's start with first principles. What is government actually for? Well, the Declaration of Independence answers this in one simple sentence. Governments are instituted to secure your rights. That's it. That's the job description. It's not there to direct your life, not to redistribute your outcomes, not to manage your choices. Government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Consent, not command. That means government's authority is bounded by what we agreed to give it, not by what it decides to take. And if we look further at founding documents and what the founders wrote for us and left for us to be the roadmap for our nation and our future, in Federalist number 51, James Madison makes the honest case for government. He didn't pretend government was noble. He was honest about why it exists. If men were angels, no government would be necessary, he said. Men are not angels, and so government is necessary, but only just enough. The whole architecture of the Constitution is actually a restraint on power, not a grant of it. The founders knew that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. It's not cynicism, that's engineering. In Federalist number 45, Madison says, the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those which remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Few and defined, that phrase is doing enormous work. National defense, treaties, interstate commerce, currency, that's the list, that was the deal. Everything else, the states retained it, not as a consolation prize, as the primary jurisdiction. States were intended to be the ones that were closest to the people and therefore retained the most power from a government perspective. Jefferson went even further than Madison. He said it's not just about limiting federal power, it's about where decisions belong in the first place. Jefferson wrote a letter to Joseph Cabell in 1816. He said, the way to have a good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to perform. That's subsidiarity, the principle that decisions belong at the most local level, competent to make them. Your town is well familiar with your roads and knows how to maintain them. Your state knows your economy. I want to localize this a little bit to where I'm from and where I live. Here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, we have many, many Amish farmers. They are always on the road in their horses and buggies. Our area knows that these farmers have their horses out on the roads, their buggies out on the roads, and they know that when it snows, even on the main roads, these horses and buggies are going to be out there. And what they don't want to do is put down toxic chemicals on the road that might melt the ice, but also harm the horses. And so they have a different way of managing snow and ice removal, and it takes a little bit longer for the roads to clear. But that's the deal that we've made locally. The rest of Pennsylvania can put their salt mixtures down and their chemical mixtures down, and we're not going to necessarily follow that. See, Washington doesn't know your life. And the further a decision gets from the people it affects, the worse it gets. That's not ideology, that's a structural build. Madison said in Federalist number 10, factions are inevitable. You can't eliminate them without eliminating liberty. So you build the republic large enough that no single faction can dominate it. That's the design. The republic was designed to produce competing ideas, not consensus. The goal was never about uniformity. It was ordered disagreement with shared rules, values. The founders didn't just argue this principle. They encoded it. The 10th Amendment is the lock on the door. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, one that most people don't even get to when they read through the Bill of Rights, even though it's the final one. And they certainly don't necessarily understand it. It's not a technicality. That is the whole architecture. Undelegated power doesn't float to Washington by default. It stays with the states, with you. We're designed to be different. Every time government acts at any level, I run it through three questions. 1, is this a shared agreement? Does the Constitution authorize it? 2, is this the right level of government, federal, state, or local? And 3, does this expand or contract individual liberty? If it fails any one of those, it doesn't matter how good the intention is, the mechanism is wrong. Government is not the source of your rights. It is the agreement we made to protect them. Keep it in its lane. I don't ask you to trust me. I ask you to think with me. And when I'm wrong, tell me. That's how this works. That's the foundation. That's the equalizer. Now let's use it. I want to start with a discussion about the Artemis Project. A lot of people have been talking about the Artemis missions. A lot of people have been talking about this most recent mission. I want to hit a little bit on that, but I want to talk about the overall project as we look forward on this. Apollo went to the moon and came home. Artemis 2 went around the moon and came home with data. One was a destination, the other's a dry run for something permanent. April 10th, 2026, Pacific Ocean, 8:07 p.m. Eastern. Splashdown confirmed. Exactly to plan, to the minute. 4 people, 10 days, 252,756 miles from Earth, to the minute. It's a record not broken since Apollo 8 in 1968, and it's the first crewed lunar distance mission since Apollo 17 in 1972. 54 years, longer than I've been alive. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency. This was the first black astronaut at lunar distance, the first woman, and the first Canadian. That's not a diversity talking point. That's what you get when you pick the best people. The media says this is a historic achievement. The left frames it as government investment vindicated, the right as American dominance. You know what? They all miss it. This was not a victory lap. This was a stress test. The Orion heat shield, Avcoat, same ablative material that Apollo used. It worked. NASA already has post-flight data, already knows what to modify for Artemis 3 and beyond. That's not nostalgia, that's iteration. Life support systems tested under real cislunar conditions, radiation exposure data collected, manual spacecraft operations in cislunar space for the first time since 1972. This mission passed its stress test. That's the sentence that matters, not we went back to the moon and came back. We proved the foundation holds. The tyranny of the rocket equation is what we have here. More fuel equals a heavier ship. A heavier ship equals more fuel to carry the fuel. It compounds. That's why Mars missions are rare, expensive, one-shot affairs. You can't engineer your way out of this. You have to fix it by changing your launching point. Water ice has been confirmed at the moon's south pole. We know it's there. Water breaks down into hydrogen and oxygen. Together, in a different configuration, that's rocket fuel. Moon's gravity is 1/6 of Earth's. The math changes completely for launches. And that's why it's important that we build a refueling station on the moon and then launch from there. I want to talk about the mission table for a minute. I want to read this like a construction timeline, not a list of missions. It's a foundation that's being built. Launched in 2022, Artemis 1 was the first in a series of increasingly complex missions that will enable human exploration. Let's look at this in phases. We'll look at phase 1, which is Artemis 1 through 3. Artemis 1 was an uncrewed systems test, just to make sure everything works before we put humans in the driver's seat. Artemis 2 was, can we send humans in a crewed ship around the moon, get some data? And then Artemis 3 is a crewed lunar surface landing test in low Earth orbit. That's where we're going to make sure that the landing systems that we were planning to use going forward will actually work. Artemis 4 is about an operational presence, and that begins with back-to-back launches landing people on the moon. Artemis 5, early base construction with annual crews and resupplies. That's not a moon program, that's a construction schedule. The shift is explicit from exploration to presence to permanence. The moon simply isn't the goal anymore, it's infrastructure to get us to the next stage, Mars and beyond. Frozen water equals fuel, lower gravity equals easy launch. That's the TLDR. Every capability we build there comes back as a solved problem for what comes next. Right now, going to Mars is like flying cross-country with no layovers and all the fuel in your carry-on. With Artemis, the moon becomes the layover. You stop treating every Mars mission as a one-shot operation. You can refuel, you can resupply, you can iterate. The route is Earth to moon, moon to Mars. Right now, we launch everything from the bottom of Earth's gravity well, the deepest in the solar system. All of that gravity energy pulling down on the rocket while it's trying to push itself away with its propellant. With lunar infrastructure, launched from 1/6 of our gravity with locally produced fuel, now you're looking at something a little bit more achievable. Launching from the moon toward Mars takes a fraction of the energy. The physics are just different. Without the moon, these missions are expensive, rare, one time. With Artemis, a scalable, improvable system for Mars becomes the reality. Apollo proved we could do it. Artemis proves we can do it repeatedly. And that's the difference between an event and a program. I want to talk a little bit about survival and learning to live off Earth, because that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. Recycling air and water becomes critical. Building habitats, managing radiation, producing your own resources. These are all problems that we need to solve. And every problem we solve on the moon is a problem we solve for Mars. This isn't just science. It's the question of whether the human species can survive the failure of a single planet and whether or not we can expand our society, our species, beyond our borders of our planet. You'll hear a lot of mention and talk about helium-3, and yes, it's potential fusion fuel. There are no fusion reactors built for it yet, but it is projected to be safer due to low radiation and much less byproducts, so a lot less waste produced. May be more efficient as it can be converted from energy to electricity directly, bypassing losses in conversion. The real value now, though, is fuel, logistics, and learning to live off Earth. Helium-3 is the long-term bonus if everything else works. Artemis 2 didn't just prove we could go back, it proved we could operate there. And that's the sentence that changes everything. Artemis isn't NASA's moon program, it's humanity's first serious attempt to become a multi-location species. April 10th, 2026 is the day we proved the first stage of that infrastructure is real. This is Manifest Destiny's legitimate heir. I know that bringing up Manifest Destiny is going to elicit some reactions, and I want to be clear. I'm not endorsing everything done in the name of it, and this isn't about sanitizing it. However, Manifest Destiny and the Monroe Doctrine originally formed a nexus of principles that built America. Now, Jefferson didn't buy Louisiana because he needed it immediately. He bought it because a republic that stops expanding its capacity eventually contracts. In Washington's farewell address, he said, national survival requires developing the means of independence. And likewise, Monroe didn't issue the Monroe Doctrine because he wanted to colonize those countries, but because he wanted to keep the corruption of colonial Europe from our shores and support the Latin American revolutions displacing Spanish colonial influence. The moon is the 21st century version of that strategic logic. Jefferson bought Louisiana for the same reason, not because he needed it immediately, because a republic that stops building its capacity eventually loses it. Monroe issued the Monroe Doctrine and acquired Spain and other lands beyond the Louisiana Purchase boundaries to project American influence. This lunar mission is no different. That's what Artemis II is leading up to. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, Jeremy Hansen. They went 252,000 miles from home, flew around the moon, came back precisely on time, not because NASA needed a photo op, but because future Artemis missions have to land, and you don't land until you've proven you can fly. The moon isn't the goal, the moon is the infrastructure. Artemis II built the first level of the foundation, and now we build the rest. What if I told you the most dangerous war in history isn't being fought on a battlefield, but inside the very institutions you trust? We've been trained to wait for the 9/11 moment, the smoke, the sirens, the sudden collapse. But while we've been watching the horizon for missiles, the floor has been dismantled beneath our feet. In my new book, Invisible War: How Nations Collapse Without War, I pull back the curtain on a strategy of conflict that Sun Tzu whispered and modern ideologies have perfected: the art of destabilization. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a structural autopsy of a nation in freefall. For our entire lives, we've been living through a silent, cascading system of feedback loops designed to make a country ungovernable without a single shot being fired. It starts with the quiet erosion of institutional legitimacy, ends with a society so fragmented that we no longer share the same reality. We are witnessing the weaponization of our own media, our own hiring processes, and our own psychological need to belong. The Invisible War is a slow burn, the death of 1,000 cuts where the victim is taught to defend the blade. As a former Marine and systems analyst, I've spent my career studying how structures hold together under pressure. Right now, those structures aren't just under pressure, they're being strategically dissolved. The war isn't coming, it's been here for decades. And while it isn't won yet, we are dangerously close to the point of no return. I wrote this book to be your manual for the shadows, because the first step to winning a war is finally admitting you're in one. We keep waiting for the dramatic moment, the invasion, the declaration, the obvious crisis. But that's not how collapse works. You won't see the moment it breaks. You'll only notice when nothing works anymore. See, we picture collapse as armies crossing borders, but that's not what the Soviet collapse looked like. It looked like an economy that stopped working, institutions people stopped trusting, a population that fragmented into competing realities before anyone fired a shot. The end was just the moment the pretense became impossible to maintain. Destabilization requires no conspiracy. It requires only that certain conditions exist. Phase 1 is doubt. Start subtle, not with a lie, with a question that doesn't get answered cleanly. One institution stumbles. One official contradicts another. First response is friction, not fracture. The institutions stop. Phase 2 is the internal turn, when institutions stop governing and start defending themselves. Rules are questioned, decisions are challenged. The bureaucracy is now fighting on two fronts, doing its job and justifying its existence. That's an unsustainable load. Phase 3, the surface holds. This is the most dangerous phase and least understood. Paychecks still clear, markets still operate, transactions still go through, everything appears to function. But underneath, the pressure is building. Trust is draining. The system is running on inertia, not legitimacy. Phase 4 is the feedback loop. The media identifies cracks, competing explanations multiply, and politicians escalate. Investigations begin. Everyone asks, how did this happen so fast? It didn't. It was gradual. This feedback loop just made it visible all at once. Phase 5 is reality fragmentation. This is the breaking point. Not economic collapse, not political failure. The moment people stop agreeing on what's real. And once people stop sharing a common reality, you can't coordinate. And if you can't coordinate, you can't govern. The 2008 financial crisis fits this mechanism precisely. The collapse didn't start in September of 2008. Those of us that remember it, we know mortgage instruments nobody fully understood, ratings agencies that stopped doing the honest work, regulators defending the system while the system was undermining itself. These were the warning signs. And by the time Lehman fell, the destabilization cascade had already been running for half a decade. The dramatic moment wasn't the cause, it was the moment the pretense became too expensive to maintain. The landscape has shifted since then. Individuals now control wealth comparable to mid-sized national economies. Corporations control distribution and information. Non-state actors operate globally. Destabilization is no longer the exclusive tool of rival governments. It can be initiated or accelerated by anyone with sufficient leverage and incentive. Algorithms amplify certain narratives and bury others. People are now exposed to different versions of reality, not as a conspiracy, as a structural feature of the information system. Madison warned us about factions, but he could not have anticipated factions that don't share a common information environment. That's the new variable inside of an old equation, and the equation doesn't balance the same way anymore. Madison said factions are inevitable. A well-designed republic makes it hard for any single faction to dominate. The system works if factions compete and if they share enough common ground to resolve disputes. Once factions stop sharing a common reality, though, it's not just competing values, but competing facts. Madison's design doesn't fail dramatically, it just slowly stops working. Adams' comment, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. What he meant is now visible in the mechanism. The system assumes citizens who can self-govern, institutions that maintain legitimacy through honest function, and a shared moral order that makes coordination possible. Strip any of those away, and what you get isn't tyranny. You get drift, slow, invisible, self-sustaining drift towards ungovernable fragmentation. The most dangerous collapse is the one that still looks like it's working. The lights are on, the websites load, the news is on at 6, but the trust is gone. The shared reality is gone, and the ability to coordinate around anything that actually matters, that's going quietly too. That's what chapter 2 of The Invisible War describes, not the end, the condition that makes the end possible. Prevention is possible, but only if you recognize the mechanism before it becomes irreversible. You won't see the moment that it breaks. You'll only notice when nothing works anymore, unless you're watching. Apollo was the achievement. Artemis is the infrastructure. And if we get it right, the universe stops being the ceiling. Here on Earth, the infrastructure that matters most isn't on the moon. It's the republic, the institutions, the shared reality that lets 330 million people coordinate without killing each other. Adams told us what it requires. The mechanism described in chapter 2 of The Invisible War tells us what happens when we lose it. Pay attention to both. I'm Evan Queich. Truth back on the scales. See you next time.